There's a gap of exactly 14.5 years hiding inside every Roth IRA owned by someone planning to retire early, and almost nobody finds out it's there until they try to spend their own money. Your Roth IRA is not the retirement account you think it is if you're planning to retire early. Everyone tells you Roth money is tax-free money. Nobody tells you it's also locked money, and the gap between those two facts can cost an early retiree years of access to their own savings. Let's meet David. David did everything the personal finance world told him to do. Started maxing his Roth IRA at 25. Never missed a year. By 45, after 2 decades of contributions and growth, his account sits at $612,000. He retires. He walks up to that account expecting a tax-free retirement, and what he finds instead is a rulebook he never read, because nobody ever handed it to him. This isn't a story about David doing something wrong. It's a story about an account that has 2 completely different sets of rules hiding inside one label, and almost nobody separates them until it's too late to matter. Here's the setup, and let's keep it fair the way this channel always does. David contributed $7,000 a year for 20 years, adjusting slightly with contribution limit increases along the way, totaling roughly $148,000 of his own after-tax money. The rest, roughly $464,000, is growth. Same account, same statement, same balance on the screen. But the IRS does not see one number. It sees 2, and the difference between them is the entire video. Bucket 1 is contributions, money David already paid income tax on before it ever went in. Bucket 2 is earnings, the growth that money produced over 20 years sitting in the market. Those 2 buckets are treated so differently that calling them both your Roth IRA is almost misleading. It's like calling a locked safe and an unlocked drawer storage and assuming they work the same way. Contributions, Bucket 1, can be withdrawn at any time, any age, for any reason, with 0 tax and 0 penalty. Not at 59.5, not after 5 years, any Tuesday David wants. That's not a loophole. That's the actual rule, written specifically because the IRS already collected its tax on that money the day it went in. If David needed to pull out his $148,000 in contributions the day after he retired at 45, he could. Penalty-free, tax-free, no questions asked. Earnings, Bucket 2, are a different animal entirely. To touch that $464,000 in growth without a penalty, David needs to satisfy 2 separate conditions, not one, and this is the part almost nobody explains correctly. Condition 1, he needs to be 59.5 years old. Condition 2, his Roth IRA needs to have been open for at least 5 tax years, a rule that starts counting from January 1st of the year of his first ever contribution, not from when he retires. Both conditions. Not either. At 45, David fails Condition 1 by 14.5 years. He satisfies Condition 2 easily, since his account has been open 2 decades. But satisfying 1 out of 2 conditions gets him nothing. It's not a 50% unlock. It's a locked door either way. And this is where the story David was told, Roth money is tax-free money, quietly breaks down into something closer to Roth money is tax-free money, eventually, on a specific date you were never told about. Let's put a real number on what happens if David tries to access that growth early anyway. Say he pulls $50,000 out of the earnings bucket at 45. That withdrawal gets hit 2 ways. First, it becomes taxable income in the year he takes it, taxed at his ordinary income rate, not the lower long-term capital gains rate people assume applies to investment growth. Second, on top of the income tax, he owes a 10% early withdrawal penalty, unless he qualifies for a specific exception. On $50,000, assuming a 22% marginal tax bracket, that's $11,000 in income tax, plus a $5,000 penalty, $16,000 gone from a $50,000 withdrawal before he spent a single dollar of it. Nearly a third of the money, vaporized by 2 conditions he didn't know existed. Here's the honest version of why this trips up exactly the people who did everything right. The entire marketing language around Roth accounts, tax-free growth, tax-free withdrawals in retirement, is true. It's just built around a retirement that starts at 59.5 or later, because that's when most people retire. Early retirees aren't breaking the rule. They're the edge case the rule was never built to accommodate cleanly, and nobody ever adjusted the pitch to mention it. So how does withdrawal ordering actually work? because this is the part that saves people who understand it and burns people who don't. The IRS uses a strict ordering rule for Roth withdrawals, and it's more forgiving than most people assume, right up until it isn't. Every withdrawal is treated as coming out of contributions first, completely tax-free and penalty-free, until contributions are exhausted. Only after all contributions are withdrawn does the IRS start pulling from converted amounts, and only after those are exhausted does it finally reach earnings. This ordering is actually good news for David, if he understands it. He has $148,000 in contributions available to him completely penalty-free, anytime, starting the day he retires. That's not nothing. If David's annual expenses in early retirement are $50,000, that $148,000 in contributions alone covers nearly 3 full years of spending, tax-free, penalty-free, no exceptions needed, no paperwork beyond a standard withdrawal form. The mistake isn't that David's money is trapped. The mistake is believing all $612,000 is equally accessible when only $148,000 of it currently is. Sit with that for a second, because it changes the entire emotional read of this video. David isn't broke. David isn't trapped. David has 3 years of runway, sitting in plain sight, completely legal, completely penalty-free, and he almost didn't know it was there. The mistake was never the account. The mistake was reading one number instead of 2. Now let's talk about the real access strategies, because if I only showed you the downsides here, I wouldn't be giving you the full picture, and this channel doesn't do that. There are real, legitimate ways to access Roth earnings early, and pretending otherwise would be just as misleading as the myth this video is correcting. The first is the Roth conversion ladder. Here's the mechanic. David can take money from a traditional IRA or old 401k, convert it into his Roth, pay ordinary income tax on the converted amount in the year of conversion, and then that specific conversion becomes withdrawable, penalty-free, after its own 5-year clock, regardless of his age. Not the account's original 5-year clock. Each conversion gets its own 5-year timer. If David converts $50,000 this year, that specific $50,000 becomes accessible in 5 years. If he converts another $50,000 next year, that batch becomes accessible the year after. Done consistently, starting 5 years before retirement, this builds a ladder of converted funds becoming available one rung at a time, effectively bridging the gap between an early retirement date and age 59.5, without ever touching the penalty at all. The second path is the rule of 55, though this applies to 401k accounts, not IRAs, and the distinction matters. If David leaves his employer in the calendar year he turns 55 or later, he can withdraw from that specific employer's 401k penalty-free, even though he's under 59.5. This doesn't apply to David at 45, 10 years too early for this specific exception, but it matters enormously for anyone retiring between 55 and 59.5. A detail most Roth-focused content never mentions because it technically belongs to a different account type. The third path is a substantially equal periodic payment plan known as a 72T election. This lets someone at any age take penalty-free withdrawals from a retirement account, provided they commit to a fixed, IRS-calculated distribution schedule for 5 years or until age 59.5, whichever is longer, and they cannot deviate from that schedule without retroactively owing penalties on everything withdrawn. It's a real option. It's also rigid enough that most financial planners treat it as a last resort rather than a primary strategy, because locking yourself into a fixed withdrawal schedule for potentially over a decade removes flexibility exactly when an early retiree might need it most. Here's what the data says about how many people actually run into this. The Employee Benefit Research Institute has tracked retirement account behavior for decades, and one consistent finding is that a significant share of early withdrawals from retirement accounts happen without the account holder understanding the tax and penalty consequences until after the withdrawal is processed. This isn't a niche problem. It's a structural blind spot built into how these accounts are marketed versus how they're regulated. Let's go back to David and lay out what an actual early retirement plan looks like once someone understands the 2-bucket structure instead of treating the whole balance as one number. Years 1 through 3 of retirement, David lives on his $148,000 in Roth contributions, withdrawing roughly $50,000 a year, tax-free, penalty-free, no strategy required beyond knowing the rule. Starting 5 years before he actually needs it, meaning in his late 30s if he's planning a 45 retirement, David begins a conversion ladder, converting a portion of a traditional account into his Roth each year, paying tax on each conversion at the time, and letting each batch season for 5 years. By the time his original contributions run dry around age 48, his earliest conversion batches are already unlocked and waiting, and the ladder continues rung by rung until he reaches 59 and a half, at which point the entire remaining balance, all $464,000 in original growth, plus whatever's grown since, becomes accessible with no restrictions of any kind. This is the part that should reframe the entire mistake. David's plan doesn't fail because Roth accounts are bad for early retirees. It fails only if he assumes the account works identically, regardless of when he retires, and does zero planning around the two conditions that actually govern access. The same $612,000 that looked like a trap at the start of this video is, with 5 years of lead time and a conversion ladder, a fully accessible retirement fund that also happens to be tax-free for the rest of David's life once he clears 59 and a half. One more honest caveat worth naming plainly. Every number in this video assumes David's income, contribution limits, and tax brackets stay reasonably stable, which real life rarely does perfectly. Contribution limits change nearly every year with inflation adjustments. Tax brackets shift with legislation. A conversion ladder built 5 years out has to be recalculated as those numbers move, not set once and forgotten. This isn't a strategy you build one time. It's a strategy you check every single year leading up to the date you actually need the money. So here's where this leaves you, plainly, whether you're 25 and just starting a Roth or 40 and closer to an early exit. First, know your two buckets. Track your total contributions separately from your total growth, because that split determines what's touchable today versus what isn't. Second, if early retirement is even a possibility, start a conversion ladder 5 years before you'll need the money, not the year you retire, because the 5-year clock doesn't compress no matter how badly you need it to. Third, understand that the rule of 55 and 72T elections exist as fallback options, but they come with real constraints, and neither should be your primary plan if a conversion ladder is available to you instead. Fourth, and simplest of all, never assume the number on your statement is the number you can spend. Know which portion of it actually belongs to you today. David's mistake was never contributing too much or trusting the wrong account. It was trusting a single number on a screen to tell him something it was never built to say. The account did exactly what it was designed to do. Nobody ever explained the design to him in a way that mattered for his specific timeline. If you want to see your own two buckets and your own ladder, the tool inside the vault takes your actual contribution history and retirement date and outputs a year-by-year unlock schedule. Which dollars are free today? Which ones unlock next year? And the exact date the whole account opens up, the same breakdown we just built for David. And if you're wondering what changes when you mix a Roth with a traditional 401k and a taxable brokerage account, all three with different rules stacked on top of each other, that's a completely different conversation, and it's the one that actually determines most people's real early retirement number. We'll run that one next.